Hey everyone, so Egghead is finally over. There is an Egghead Island arc analysis coming around, not next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. Wano analysis is coming out September 17th, so just wait for that. But Egghead analysis is coming first, right off the back of this arc ending. We're gonna give it one more chapter just to see if there's something else that's gonna happen on Egghead Island itself with Saturn and Emeth. But it seems like the arc itself is finally over, which is really funny because for a lot of Egghead, the arc kept ballooning to be larger and larger and longer than people thought. And to the point that, we were thinking it'll be ending at around 1100, then maybe 1110, then maybe, suddenly became like, okay, what if we go on for 15 or 20 more chapters? And then all of a sudden, it just ended. So it was kind of like initially we're thinking too small, and then we began thinking bigger and bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden, the arc is just done all of a sudden because Joy Boys Haki is kind of that solution that basically resolved all of their problems, sent the Gorosei back home, took care of the Buster Call, basically gave them a free passage right out of there to Elbaf. So, it's time to get excited about Elbaf. Next week's video will be about Elbaf, specifically Usopp and Elbaf. So I'm going to leave all my discussion about Usopp for that upcoming video because I think there's a ton to be excited for with regards to Usopp and Elbaf. I'm going to leave that for next Tuesday's video. I'm just going to focus on everything else this chapter because I thought that this was a really, really well done chapter that filled out a lot of the holes that I felt kind of existed in terms of Vegapunk's whole storyline. I think this suddenly clicked everything into place as to all the mysteries and the question marks as to why this or that happened in Egghead itself. I do have some issues as to the logic of what Vegapunk chose to share in his speech, but at the same time, the revelations from this chapter did fill in the gaps in a way that I felt were satisfying as to my earlier questions in the arc, if that makes sense. It also made me like Vegapunk as a character much more. I've actually liked Vegapunk as a character more posthumously than I did when he was alive. I enjoyed his entire speech. I felt that while his speech, again, was missing some key pieces of information that he strangely did not include, I say strangely did not include, I feel like Oda probably felt that it would move the plot too far forward if Vegapunk revealed the things that made sense for him to reveal, but again, we will get to that shortly. I feel like Vegapunk's speech, if you just go through and read that entire monologue, it is first of all, it's by far the longest monologue in all of One Piece, and it paints the picture of a very thoughtful, nuanced, somewhat conflicted man who's leaving behind what he thinks is the best legacy for the future. And I think the events of this chapter that sort of filled in the blanks as to his entire thought process, him having these sort of concerted meetings and efforts with the other parts of himself, the other pieces of his consciousness, him lamenting the simple fact that he failed to realize that extracting his own greed as an individual would lead to this. I think it all paints the picture of a very intelligent but at the same time tragic figure. So I love the fact that we finally got to find out, what Vegapunk's master plan was, when he planned all this, how come so much of it seemed to happen without any sort of prior warning or explanation by him, why York did not have the information that Vegapunk did this entire time and why she was left in the dark, and similarly, why Vegapunk was seemingly taken by surprise by everything that York did, because the fact that they all shared memories was a big sticking point that many readers such as myself were wondering about throughout the arc. So Oda definitely had all of that planned out from the beginning. I did think that this chapter was sort of a beautifully done send-off to Vegapunk as a character. To me, this felt like his true death chapter, whereas at the time that he died, funnily enough, I didn't really care as much, whereas now I feel like I know and understand him way better than I ever did while he was alive. I think that is one of the coolest examples of, a legacy or message living on even after death for a character, because that's a common theme in One Piece, right? Like Roger's speech, Hirulook's speech, Vegapunk's dying speech, I think it kind of takes the cake in terms of probably the most impactful on the people of the One Piece world, maybe even topping Roger and Whitebeard's stats. Now, in that same vein, this chapter did open some painful, in my opinion, logical issues, which is just Vegapunk, for all of the stuff that he explained to the people of the world, he failed to point out that the world government is likely the root cause of it. I know that some people have said that Vegapunk doesn't want to cast moral judgments on the world government, but to that point, I would say, well, then what was the entire purpose of the speech? He doesn't even have to say that he thinks the world government is evil. He can just share that if he's trying to save the people of the world, if he is sharing the idea that, hey, the world will likely be flooded very soon through the use of the ancient weapon, the most helpful piece of information to also give the people of the world is that he is also 99% confident that the source of the use of this ancient weapon is the world government. Leaving out that crucial part is insane when the goal seems to be to try to help the people of the world. It would be like if somebody found out that there's a bomb that's going to go off in a building, and the most likely suspect is suspect A, but then this person just announced to everybody in the building, hey, there's a bomb that's going to go off, and then just ends the message right there. You are giving people helpful information, but it's basically up to the people to basically sort of figure out what you've already pretty much solved. This is especially strange because Vegapunk began this whole journey of researching the Void Century in the ancient history because he viewed the world government as the enemy, and he wanted to follow in the footsteps of Clover, who was killed by the world government. Like, Vegapunk understood for a long time that the world government is the enemy, and it's clear from his thought process in this chapter that he viewed them as the most likely candidates by far for having used the ancient weapon. I mean, he literally hears York talking to Marijua. It's not really something that's a question mark for him anymore. He even had the option of forcing York to tell him the truth or extracting the source of truth from her, but he for some reason just decided that York is simply irrelevant. So if you want to argue that he had no way of knowing for sure that the world government were the perpetrators, that's basically false based on his conclusions that he drew from this own chapter and the fact that he had the option of interrogating York to find out. And if you want to argue that he just didn't want to tell the people of the world for moral reasons, that's very strange because telling the people of the world how to solve the doomsday problem that they're being faced with, it's not even a moral thing at that point. You don't have to judge if the world government's good or evil. Just telling the people that, hey, this is the person that is going to kill you with ancient weapons, that's the actual valuable source of information. Honestly, the vast majority of stuff that he told them about, Joy Boy, pirates, the origin of all that, etc., it's not really relevant to helping them survive today. And lastly, if you want to say, well, it would have caused too much chaos if Vegapunk told the world that the world government is the ones behind the flooding of the world and the use of the ancient weapons, that doesn't really make sense because chaos is going to be caused inherently by telling the people of the world that, hey, your entire world is going to flood and it's going to be caused by the use of ancient weapons. That causes chaos in and of itself. The only thing that pointing out the perpetrator would do is help the people at least have a direction to point to in terms of finding a solution. Again, if you just tell people that there's a bomb that's going to go off in the building, that's going to cause chaos as is. If you tell people there's a bomb that's going to go off in the building, and the bomb is held by this person, even though that will also cause chaos, that at least allows for people to try and make a concerted effort to stop that individual. Otherwise, you're essentially just giving people nothing to work with other than, you're gonna die. So while I can enjoy the character writing that Oda did for Vegapunk through both his speech and this chapter covering the hidden events that happened in the 2 weeks prior to this arc, I feel like Oda made Vegapunk act in a very deliberately illogical way for some key points, just so that the plot of One Piece didn't move forward too fast. Because, you know, you can come up with as many excuses as possible for why Vegapunk's speech played out the way that it did, but the simple reality is that we, the reader, can understand that it played out the way it did likely for out-of-story purposes rather than in-story purposes. The out-of-story purposes being that the author knew that if he establishes that the world government is the final enemy for all the people of the world right off the bat, then that would force the entire plot of One Piece to move forward a bit too quickly, which Oda did not want to have happen. That leads to the sort of crude implementation of Vegapunk's final message to the world, in that for no real discernible reason, he leaves out the most important point of the message. I think readers can headcanon various reasons as to why Vegapunk might have left this out, but I think the reality is that it feels very blatant that Oda just couldn't move the story forward that fast, but he needed to get the ball rolling in that direction here, and so he had Vegapunk solve everything, but for some, insert headcanon here, reason, Vegapunk just didn't tell everything to the people of the world. So bottom line being, I enjoyed the speech, I enjoyed this chapter a lot, and I enjoyed Vegapunk's character quite a bit. I just feel like you can't ignore the one big elephant in the room that's stuffed into all this, which is that for out-of-story reasons, there was a big logic hole inserted into Vegapunk's speech that is hard for me to reconcile. Now beyond that, we do have something very, very interesting, which is a comparison being made between Joy Boy's haki to Shanks' haki. Now, the actual official translation seems to be the Giants asked a question, was that haki greater than Shanks' haki? Implying that the Giants have both seen Joy Boy's haki and Shanks' haki and actually do not know which is greater. If you're a Shanks fan, that is phenomenal news because it basically means that Shanks' haki is so great that despite the amazing display of what the Giants just saw in this chapter, Shanks' haki is actually comparable to that, and the Giants literally can't tell whose is greater. I've seen some readers argue that, well, well, the Giants haven't seen other characters' Haki like Kaido, Big Mom, Mihawk, etc., but that's not really relevant. All we're being told is that whatever Haki display that we just got from Joy Boy, Shanks' Haki display, at its peak, seems to be of comparable nature to it. It's not like the Giants would need other comparisons of Conqueror's Haki to make that observation. So if you're a Shanks fan, this chapter was basically insane hype for the character. And finally, we have two very sharp observations from the Voice of the People, my top tier of patrons. So Justin Holland said, this may be a chapter too premature, but I feel like at this point Luffy has passed Emperor officialization test, correct? Yes, I think the fact that the Straw Hats came out of this pretty much unscathed is phenomenal. They came out of this with a victory. Yes, Joy Boy's Haki was needed to save them at the very end, but let's be honest, 5 Admiral level or greater characters coming after the crew at the same time, any Yonko crew is going to struggle with that. The fact that the Straw Hats held out as well as they did, they sent Mars out of there, they fended off the Gorosei bit by bit, Zoro and Venus Juro, Luffy, Dorian Brogy trying to hold off Warcury and Jupiter, everybody doing a really good job against Saturn, and of course, the Buster Call and Admiral Kizaru itself, the Straw Hats had no trouble dealing with that. They could have soloed Kizaru and the Buster Call basically by themselves with zero problem. It's only when he threw the Gorosei like the kitchen sink at them that it actually became an issue and they had to be saved with Joy Boy's Haki, and even then, against overwhelmingly unfair odds, they did really, really well. So, flying colors, they passed the Yonko test. And then Fohum says, I believe that if exposed, the government would commit mass genocide recklessly before the people could prepare for the floods, resulting in a great death count similar to what happened to Lucia Kingdom. I think that that's possible, but who's to say that the world government wouldn't take that step already once Vegapunk basically exposes literally everything else, as well as the fact that the world is about to be flooded by the use of the ancient weapon. Remember, the Gorosei were already planning on doing a great cleansing before any of this happened. Like, it's very obviously going down no matter what. The one way to actually help the people of the world is tell them who the culprit is so that actions could hypothetically be taken against the world government. So that's my thoughts on this speech. Maybe we get some more clarification next week, and I'm speaking too soon, so I'll definitely look forward to next week's chapter and preparation for Elbaf. So with that, I will talk to you all later.